Hey guys, welcome to another episode of BBQ Talk. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about kiln-dried wood and naturally seasoned wood. So in the last video, we talked about how to incorporate smoke flavor, if you're not using an offset or if you're not using split logs and things like that. But let's say you are. Let's say you are now starting to get wood from your wood guy, or you're getting full splits for somewhere else, and maybe you're splitting, them on your own in your backyard, things like that. But we want to make sure that when we are getting wood from someone else, that it is wood that we actually want to be cooking with. Just like most of us spend a lot of time talking about, sourcing meat and things like that, I think it's equally as important for us to understand, where our wood comes from and how it's processed. And in this case, I'm not really talking about, what type of wood. We hear a lot of times, especially since most people know that, post oak is kind of like the wood that you want to be smoking with. It really, guys, it really doesn't matter. Like I am offered post oak where I'm getting my wood from too, but I think just because the name of post oak after Central Texas style barbecue has gotten so big, it's almost more expensive just for the name, but really it just falls underneath the category of a white oak. And so the wood that I have, I'm sure there's some post oak mixed in there, but generally I'm just ordering white oak. And whatever wood that you want to cook with is perfectly fine. Another one of my woods that I like to incorporate every now and then is, sometimes like they'll give me a bundle of whatever like wood is left on the truck at the end of the route. So sometimes I might get some pecan, sometimes I'll get some apple, sometimes I'll get mesquite, and just kind of play around with things. And really, I wouldn't say the type of wood is a make or break in terms of your brisket or your ribs being good or bad. It's just, like I said, like seasoning, it's like a preference. But one thing that can't be a preference is the way that the wood is processed. If you guys don't know what kiln-dried wood is basically where they take all the wood and they just kind of stick it in basically a giant oven and dry it out. And that type of wood, I'm sure it has its purposes for other things, but cooking is not one of them. When you're cooking with wood, you want something that's going to last a long time, or a decent amount of time, because you want to get it to be a nice rolling gentle heat, and eventually you want it to produce coals. Something that you're getting with kiln-dried wood, it's basically, because it's so dried out, it's kind of like we talked about in the last episode with wood chips and wood chunks, and they're just basically big, thicker matchsticks. So one thing that you'll notice is if you are using dried wood, that it's really an aggressive fire. You might even notice that the color of your fire is a little bit more orange than you would if you were using like a just naturally seasoned wood, and it's because it's burning so hot. The other thing that you might notice too is if you're looking at your smokestack, if you're cooking it with it, it might look like, it is cleaning, it's burning really clean because there's really not that much smoke coming out of that stack. And I'm not saying there isn't smoke, but you're not getting the same type of smoke that you would with a naturally seasoned wood. But more than that, the most important thing, if you are trying to learn how to cook with just split logs, is that the main difference for me of going from something that's kiln dried to naturally seasoned is the process of which it's prepared is not allowing you to create coals. If you're cooking with a properly aged wood, the thing that's happening is because of the moisture that's left in there, as it breaks down and gets close to allowing you to incorporate as much smoke from that piece, it's going to break up into coals, and that's where you get your coal bed from. If you are purely cooking with kiln-dried wood, it doesn't happen that way. The nature of the wood itself, after it's gone through that process, it doesn't really create coals. Like, you might be able to smash them down to smaller chunks, but they become ash much, much quicker. So if you are used to cooking with that type of wood, you'll notice that you're adding a lot more wood onto the pile because you're starting to see that the coal bed isn't really there. In order for you to keep the fire going, you are adding more wood to it, and you're getting a really, really hot fire. And you'll also notice that you have way more heat spikes because every single time you throw a piece on there, because it burns so quickly, that heat just boom, it just skyrockets. So that's kind of like the main concern with when you're trying to source wood, is you want to make sure that you're getting the good stuff. And even though, let's say, you're getting seasoned wood that maybe isn't aged as long as they said that it was, and it does feel a little bit heavier, I would still prefer the stuff that's a little bit heavier, and maybe just stack it up in your backyard and let it go for a little bit longer, then go for something that, is gonna burn really fast. This is probably my biggest concern, and what I hear from a lot of backyard cooks is, they're getting ready to do a cook they haven't done in a while, or they have maybe they're doing a pop-up for the first time and they realize they're out of wood. And so one thing that they'll do is they're trying to look for wood wherever they can, and the only thing that's really available is the kiln-dried wood, and that's really something that you don't want. So I would say if you're someone who is going to if you cook frequently, or if you are someone who does if you do catering or pop-ups every now and then, make sure you just stock up on wood. Even though it's not necessarily ready to go when you buy it, I think keeping it for yourself for a couple months and stuff like that, even though it gets rained on or whatever, like it's gonna be better than something that's been dried in a giant oven. So other question might be, well, what if you don't know if your wood is necessarily kiln dried, or if it's just naturally seasoned? I have some wood that's back there in my backyard that I don't think it is kiln dried, but I've had it for so long that it kind of almost replicates that same kind of dryness that you would get in something like that, just because it's been sitting there for so long. And the question is, like, how do you know, like, if you should cook with it or not? So what I generally do with the wood that I get, and this is not like a very scientific way of, I guess, testing to see if your wood is good or not for the purpose of cooking, but it is kind of like a habit that I've developed when I'm not really necessarily sure, because the color of the wood is a little bit different. It's a little bit darker, almost like it's been dried out. And so, like, sometimes I'll be like, man, I don't know, like this one might, like, especially in certain parts of the cook where you don't want it to spike too early. You want to definitely make sure that this is a piece of wood that you want to use. So to test that, we're gonna go out, we're gonna take a field trip, we're gonna go out in the backyard to where all the wood is, and then we're gonna kind of do my little test. All right, guys, so this test, again, it's not a scientific test. I don't really fully know what the moisture content is in my two splits, but like I said, we're really trying to do something where we're trying to get a good feel for everything, because we don't have measures. I mean, you do have a measure to find the content moisture of water. I don't have one, and I also don't think that we're all going to spend so much time stabbing every piece of log just to see if it's good to burn or not. So I have two splits right here. One is I'll show you which one's the natural one, which one is kiln dried. And again, we're just really looking for the sound. The sound is going to be really different between the two. The one that is kiln dried is going to sound, like dead wood. Like, there's really not too much sound to it. So it's going to sound like it just hits the ground and that's it. All right. And the other one, I like to say it sounds like, a bowling ball hitting pins, right? We're basically hit the strike zone, and it should sound a little bit more pingy, I guess is the word. But I'll show you guys what I mean, and hopefully you guys can hear it, on this video. So you guys can see in this one right here, this is our naturally seasoned wood. You can see, like, there's different colors to it. The bark is still attached to it. It's not flaking off. I mean, this part it's loose, but it's still pretty much attached to the surface. And the grains are a little bit tighter, so it's not super dried out. We're looking at the one that's been really dried out. Again, this isn't kiln dried, but I've had this wood back here for a really, really long time, so it's pretty much the same thing. You can see, like, the texture of this one. It's starting to split a little bit more. The bark is definitely gone. Usually when it dries off, this usually just flakes off. So, but they're pretty similar in size, and I wanted to make sure that we can compare the two in that way. So I'm going to start with this one that's been dried for a really long time, and listen for the sound. Hopefully you guys can hear it all. It's going to sound a little more thuddy. So it sounds a little bit more kind of just like it just hits the ground and just dies. There's really no life in it. So again, this is one that's going to tell me, hey, it's really not going to incorporate a lot of smoke. It's going to burn really fast. It's going to help you get your temp up. But again, it's not a piece of wood that I want to throw in when there's meat in there, because it's going to spike up the temp quite a bit. All right, so here's our dry wood. Now, like, when you pick up a log, you'll feel like it's heavier than, and you don't want something that's super heavy. But this one does have still quite a bit of moisture in there, but I think it is ready to burn. Listen for the sound. It should sound more like I said, like a bowling ball hitting pins. When you hear kind of like that strike, I guess you can say, that's probably a good indication that you got a piece of wood that is aged properly. Usually if there's too much moisture or there's not enough, it's going to sound really thuddy or dead. But if it's hitting the right spot, I guess, like I said, you can call the strike zone of what your wood should sound like. Yeah, you want to get something that sounds a little pingy like that. So the question is, maybe you do have a bunch of, kiln-dried wood in your backyard or something like that, and you're asking, so should I just not use it anymore? No, I think you should still use it. And I still probably, if I do get some, if I know that some of it kind of had fallen into the mix, I'll just make sure I separate it from the stuff that is more naturally aged. And I'll use it for starting fires, basically. It's kind of like the same thing as when other places use, blocking logs. Sometimes those pieces are really large, and we're probably not going to be able to use them for the purpose of cooking in that state, just because we're going to have to use that piece of wood eventually within the next week or two. But it's probably not going to age well enough for us to use. So, we'll stick that in front of our briskets, and that'll just be our blocking log. And usually then we'll use that blocking log to help us, usually when the briskets are wrapped and we're not necessarily worried about, things getting too hot, because we want the temp to be a little bit hotter, we'll throw those into the fire. But that's probably not my favorite way of using it. Because I do still worry about things getting too hot, and you don't want to dry out your briskets when you spent so much time taking care of everything, and then at the last minute you're just throwing this giant, basically, this log that is just going to skyrocket your temps, and now you're going to have to, wait for that temp to drop. So you open up that front door, just let out some air, and it just slows down the process. So my favorite time to use it is basically just to start fires. And usually, because of the wood that I'm getting here, I do think it is aged as long as they say that it is. Generally, what I'm looking for is something that is, roughly about 6 to 7 months or so is usually a good time frame, where I don't necessarily know the percentage of moisture and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm just guessing, but it feels pretty good. Sometimes there'll be some sizzling from the wood, but it doesn't really bother me. I just change the way that I build my fires and how I manage them to kind of combat that. But I know that if my wood does have a little bit more moisture than I would like to have, I know that I need it to have like a Kickstarter in the beginning. So when I'm starting those fires, I'll mix it with some kiln-dried wood to help kind of bring that other stuff up to temp as quickly as possible. And then after that, then you can start using your naturally dried stuff, because now it's hot enough to bring in a new piece that has a little bit more moisture and have it keep burning, regularly. All right, guys, so that's the end of this video. I hope you got some information that you can use in your backyards. Yeah, if you have any questions, again, please leave them down in the comments down below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. I'll see you guys in the next one.